Usually when you are driving a car, the dashboard right in front of you is this absolute miracle of objective information.
Right. It's totally reliable.
Exactly. You glance down at the speedometer, the gas gauge, the engine temperature, and you just inherently trust it. You don't sit there and debate the philosophical meaning of the fuel needle.
Yeah. If the engine temperature dial swings into the red, you pull over.
Yeah.
I mean, the metrics map perfectly to physical reality.
They do. It's a closed, rational system. The dashboard is basically designed to protect the machine and the passengers, by giving you a real-time reflection of the physical state of the vehicle.
Right. It's keeping you alive.
But then you step into the world of global economics,
Yeah.
and we look to our political and financial leaders, and they are pointing to a completely different dashboard.
A completely different one. Yeah.
They're pointing to a dial called GDP, Gross Domestic Product. And that dial is just spinning upward, indicating this fantastic, record-breaking progress. But if you actually look out the window, the engine of our planetary vehicle it's literally melting through the floorboards.
Oh, absolutely. The climate is destabilizing, biodiversity is just collapsing, and inequality is skyrocketing.
Right. We're staring at a dashboard that says success, while the physical reality says catastrophe.
It is the literal definition of flying blind while feeling perfectly in control, and that profound disconnect between the economic metrics we worship and, the ecological reality we live in. That's the foundational problem we are unpacking today.
Yeah. So welcome to the deep dive. We are embarking on the first in an ongoing series of deep dives into a truly groundbreaking 2025 book by economist Timothée Parrique. It's titled Slow Down or Die: The Economics of Degrowth.
It's such a brilliant piece of work.
It really is.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, for you listening, we are focusing specifically on the arguments laid out in the book's introduction and Chapter 1. Just a quick piece of housekeeping, though. The link to the original source material is right there in the description.
Yes, definitely click that.
We strongly encourage you to read the original text yourself. Our goal here is to enhance and unpack the mechanics of the book, to really help you deeply understand how the author thinks. We are certainly not here to replace the reading experience.
No, not at all. And to really understand why Parrique's work is causing such a massive paradigm shift, we have to look at the dominant narrative of our time.
The one we hear every day.
Right. We are constantly told that humanity as a whole is responsible for the current ecological collapse. I mean, it's become so accepted that scientists have even coined a new geological epoch, right? The Anthropocene.
Anthropos meaning human.
Exactly. The implicit story there is that it's simply human nature, that the collective actions of the entire hominid family are what's driving us toward the cliff.
Yeah, it's framed as this universal original sin. Like, because we all use electricity or because we all breathe and consume, we all share the blame equally.
Right. It spreads the guilt so thin that nobody in particular seems responsible.
But Parrique completely rejects that premise right out of the gate, doesn't he?
Oh, completely. He argues that naming this era the Anthropocene actually masks these profound, almost unfathomable inequalities. The statistics he provides to back this up are just staggering.
Yeah, lay those out for us because they blew my mind.
So in 2021, the richest 10% of the world's population owned 76% of the world's wealth.
Wait, the top 10% holding nearly 4/5 of everything?
Yes. And crucially, that same top 10% emits 50% of all greenhouse gases.
Half of the emissions from just 10% of the people.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the poorest half of the world's population, which is roughly 4 billion people, they emit 4 times less than that tiny top fraction.
Wow. So when we say humanity is destroying the planet, we're just entirely ignoring the data.
We are. Parrique argues we shouldn't call it the Anthropocene at all. We should call it the Capitalocene or the Econocene.
Because the primary cause of this ecological derailment isn't intrinsic human nature.
Right. It's a very specific, historically recent economic structure that demands relentless expansion.
And this is where we need to be crystal clear about our mission for you today. We are going to dismantle the concept of economic growth, which is something you hear treated as an unquestionable good every single day on the news.
Every day. It's ubiquitous.
But I want to stress, we are not taking a political stance on these fiercely debated topics. Our objective is strictly to impartially unpack Parrique's provocative claims.
Yeah, we just want to look under the hood of capitalism and growth so you can deeply understand the mathematical and physical logic he is using.
Exactly. So let's start with the central thesis of Chapter 1. He claims that economic growth, which we measure by GDP, has mutated from a simple accounting tool into this global ideology.
Yeah, he describes it as a myth with 1,000 connotations. I mean, in the modern political arena, the word growth has become totally synonymous with progress, prosperity, and happiness.
But the core argument of the book is that our pursuit of continuous exponential economic growth has actually become a countdown to doom.
A literal countdown. The global economy is currently functioning as a weapon of mass destruction, and this is the vital nuance here. This destruction isn't happening because people are inherently malicious or greedy.
Right. It's not villains in a boardroom rubbing their hands together.
No, it's happening because we are chained to an incentive structure that prioritizes the sheer volume of market transactions over actual human well-being and planetary boundaries.
It's like we're on a bus speeding toward a cliff, and we are foolishly celebrating every added mile per hour as progress instead of, hitting the brakes.
That is the perfect analogy.
So to understand how we became chained to that structure, we need to completely redefine how we think about wealth and poverty. Like, we hear the term purchasing power constantly in the news.
All the time.
It's usually tied to inflation, right? Like how much physical stuff your dollar can buy at the grocery store. But the author argues we need to shift our focus from purchasing power to living power.
Yes. And this requires looking at the work of economist Amartya Sen, who developed the capability approach, and the Chilean economist Manfred Max Neef.
Okay, let's break down Max Neef first, because this is fascinating.
So Max Neef proposed that if we want to build a rational economy, we cannot start with money. We have to start with fundamental human needs.
Because money is just one extremely narrow, historically specific way to satisfy a need.
Exactly. Max Neef catalogs 9 fundamental needs that he argues are universal across all human cultures. Let me just list them. Subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, idleness, creation, identity, and freedom.
I am immediately struck by the inclusion of idleness as a fundamental human need. I mean, we are so conditioned to view idleness as a fin, right? As just being unproductive.
Oh, absolutely. But he categorizes the space to rest, to contemplate, to simply exist without producing as essential to human flourishing.
It makes perfect sense when you step outside the capitalist mindset. And this brings us to Sen's capability approach.
Right. Because in the dominant economic model, poverty is purely a metric of money. If you fall below a certain daily income, you are poor. End of story.
But Sen argues that poverty is actually a lack of capability to satisfy one of those fundamental needs we just listed.
Yes. Well-being flows from what you are actually capable of doing and being. So poverty is plural.
Let me see if I can map that onto a modern lifestyle for a second. So you could have an incredibly high salary. Say you are an investment banker making $500,000 a year.
Okay, sure.
By GDP standards, you are the pinnacle of wealth. But if that job requires you to work 80 hours a week, and you have to take prescription medication just to fall asleep, and you never see your children?
Then you are deeply idleness poor and likely affection poor.
Exactly. You have massive purchasing power, but your living power is fundamentally compromised.
Conversely, you might live in a rural community where your monetary income is very low by global standards.
But if you have stable access to food, a tight-knit community that supports you during emergencies, and ample time to spend with your family,
then you are participation rich and protection rich. The point Parrique is making here is that we can organize society to satisfy these needs in drastically different ways.
Right. Let's look at the basic need for subsistence. You can acquire food by growing it in a community garden and sharing it with your neighbors.
Which is a non-market interaction.
Or you can drive to a corporate supermarket and buy imported vegetables wrapped in plastic, which is a market interaction.
And the dashboard of GDP only recognizes the supermarket. This is the crazy part. If the entire town starts using the community garden, the GDP actually drops.
Wow. So the economic indicators would trigger a panic. They'd claim the town is in a recession, even though everyone is perfectly well-fed and arguably happier.
That is the crux of it. Parrique suggests that the economy should simply be the parsimonious organization of our contentment.
The parsimonious organization of our contentment. I love that phrasing.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It should just be a supply system designed to efficiently satisfy human needs.
So if an economic system forces you to destroy your physical health and the local environment just to earn the currency required to buy the things you need to survive,
then that system is failing, regardless of how fast the GDP is growing.
Which leads to a profound question about what GDP is actually measuring, if it isn't measuring human contentment.
Right.
Because we naturally think of the word product in gross domestic product as a physical accumulation of wealth. We think of it as the size of the national pie.
But the text is very clear that GDP is a flow, not a stock.
Okay, this is so important. We really need to unpack
This
this.
is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in modern economics. A stock is an accumulation. Think of a forest.
Okay, I'm picturing a forest.
The timber in that forest, the biodiversity, the carbon it stores, that is a stock of real wealth. GDP does not measure that
It just completely ignores the stock.
entirely. GDP only measures the flow of wealth production over a specific period of time.
So if we use a bathtub analogy, the stock is the amount of water currently held in the tub.
Exactly. And GDP doesn't care if the tub is full or completely empty. GDP only measures how fast the water is blasting out of the faucet.
Parrique uses a brilliant example in the book to illustrate the sheer absurdity of this. He asks us to imagine two bakers tasked with making the exact same cake.
Yes, the baker analogy, it's so good.
So the first baker is an amateur. They drop a carton of eggs on the floor, so they have to drive back to the store, buy gas, and purchase more eggs.
They leave the oven on for an hour too long, wasting electricity.
Yeah, and they completely trash the kitchen, so they have to hire a professional cleaning service to come in and sanitize the workspace.
And then you have the second baker, who is an absolute master.
Right. They use the precise amount of ingredients necessary. They use the oven at maximum energy efficiency.
They clean up their own workspace with a damn cloth in 5 minutes.
And at the end of the process, both bakers place the exact same cake on the table.
The resulting stock of wealth, the cake itself, is identical.
But the economic dashboard treats these two scenarios entirely differently. The amateur baker generated a massively higher GDP.
Because they engaged in more market transactions. They got extra eggs, they burned extra gasoline, they paid the utility company for wasted electricity, and they paid a cleaning service.
All those are monetary flows.
Yep. While the master baker, by being efficient and avoiding waste, generated a much lower GDP.
So the inescapable conclusion is that GDP cannot differentiate between a monetary flow that genuinely enriches society and a monetary flow that is simply compensating for inefficiency or repairing a mistake or recovering from a disaster.
Exactly. It is merely a measure of market agitation. It only measures how fast money is changing hands.
So if we follow that logic, a society that engineers its products to break after a year, planned obsolescence, that society will generate a much higher GDP than a society that builds durable goods that last a lifetime.
Oh, without a doubt. If I have to buy a new washing machine every 3 years, the flow of money is constant.
But if I buy one that lasts 50 years, the market flow stops, and economists call that a crisis,
We are literally optimizing the globe for inefficiency.
which is terrifying. And that brings us to the physical reality of how this agitation interacts with the planet. This requires looking at the economy as a metabolic superorganism.
A metabolic superorganism. Yeah.
That phrase sounds almost biological.
It is biological. This concept stems from ecological economics, which is a field pioneered by thinkers like Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen in the 1970s.
Okay, and what did he argue?
Georgescu-Roegen argued that the economy is fundamentally subject to the laws of thermodynamics. It is like a giant animal. It must ingest energy and natural materials from the environment to survive, and it must expel waste and pollution back into the environment.
I mean, on the surface, that sounds painfully obvious. Everything is made of atoms and requires energy. Why was that considered a radical idea in economics?
Because it directly contradicted the foundational assumptions of mainstream macroeconomic theory, which had somehow completely divorced itself from physical reality.
Wait, really? How do you divorce economics from physical reality?
Well, Parrique contrasts this metabolic view with the incredibly influential models developed by economists like Robert Solow, who actually won a Nobel Prize for this.
Okay, what was Solow's theory?
So in the 1970s, as people were first starting to worry about running out of resources, Solow developed theories based on the concept of substitutability.
Meaning we can just substitute one thing for another when we run out.
Essentially, yes. The assumption was that human manufactured capital, our machinery, our labor, our technological innovation could infinitely substitute for natural resources.
So he argued we didn't need nature.
Solow quite literally argued that the world could, in effect, get along without natural resources.
That is insane. How did he justify that?
The underlying mechanism of his theory was price. If copper becomes scarce, the price of copper goes up. That high price creates a financial incentive for human ingenuity to find a substitute for copper. Therefore, according to the theory, the economy can continue to grow indefinitely, totally detached from the physical limits of the Earth.
I am genuinely struggling to understand how a Nobel laureate could argue that. It assumes that technological progress happens by magic, completely untethered from the physical world.
It does. Let's apply Solo's logic to a real-world ecological function to see how it falls apart. Let's look at the bee.
Okay, the biological bee.
Right. Mainstream economics views a bee pollinating an apple orchard as a free input. If the bees go extinct because of pesticide use, the substitutability theory says, no problem, the price of apples will rise, and we will simply invent a technological substitute.
Like we will build tiny drone bees to pollinate the crops.
Exactly. And from a purely spreadsheet-driven perspective, that might actually look like growth. Building billions of drone bees would create a massive new industry, lots of jobs, and high GDP.
But from a metabolic perspective, it is a catastrophic delusion.
Total delusion.
Because a biological bee is not just a line item on a ledger. It is composed of biological matter. It is powered by the nectar it consumes.
Yes, and it's the highly refined result of millions of years of evolutionary genetic information.
Most importantly, it coexists with thousands of other species in incredibly complex, interdependent soil and weather ecosystems.
You cannot just build a factory to replace the biosphere.
Right. The sheer volume of raw materials, the lithium, the copper, the plastics, and the massive amount of energy required to manufacture, program, and maintain trillions of robotic bees. It would require tearing up huge swaths of the earth.
The substitute destroys the host in a completely new way.
That is the fatal flaw in the mainstream theory. Production cannot go against nature.
It physically can't. All human production, no matter how knowledge-based or digital we claim it is, mobilizes energy and raw materials.
Yeah, even the server farms powering our digital lives require massive amounts of water and electricity.
Exactly. It all relies on foundational ecosystem processes, pollination, global climate regulation, the water cycle, that are physically impossible to substitute at a planetary scale.
So if the global economy is a metabolic superorganism, and that organism is exponentially growing, it is inherently going to eat more of its host and expel more toxic waste than the host can assimilate.
Infinite material growth on a finite planet is a thermodynamic impossibility.
Okay, so if the underlying math of infinite growth is physically impossible, and the pursuit of it is demonstrably destroying the biosphere, we have to ask a really difficult psychological question.
Right.
How did we get trapped in this specific math? Why do ordinary, rational people wake up every day and participate in a system that is destroying their own habitat?
To explain the psychology of this, Parrique adapts a famous philosophical concept from Hannah Arendt, the banality of evil.
Okay, but Arendt originally used this phrase to describe how ordinary, completely unexceptional bureaucrats could participate in the horrors of the Holocaust simply by doing their jobs, right? By just following the rules of their specific departments.
Yes. And Parrique is obviously not comparing the economy to a genocide, but he adapts the mechanism to describe the banality of economic evil.
So it's the idea that the system itself predetermines behaviors that we would individually consider sociopathic.
Precisely. The causal mechanism here is our daily, mundane obligations. We are not evil. We are hostages to a highly structured architecture.
Like you have to pay your student loans, you have to make rent, you have to buy groceries.
Exactly. And at the corporate level, a CEO is legally bound by the concept of fiduciary duty to maximize financial returns for shareholders.
Right. If the CEO decides to voluntarily reduce production to save a local river, they can literally be sued and fired by the board of directors.
So the moral compass of the individual is completely severed from the action of the corporation.
The consequence of everyone just trying to meet their survival-driven obligations is that we get brilliant mathematical minds dedicating their lives to inventing predatory, high-frequency trading algorithms.
We get chemical engineers designing plastics that will never degrade.
We get marketing executives utilizing behavioral psychology to make us feel inadequate, so we will buy fast fashion that just ends up in a landfill.
And the justification that allows everyone to sleep at night is always the exact same. If I don't do it, someone else will.
Man, that is bleak. And that phrase really highlights the diffuse nature of the violence.
It does. It is a slow violence. If I asked you to walk into a forest and personally burn down 100 ancient trees, you would refuse.
Of course.
You would feel the immediate moral weight of the destruction. But the economy inserts layers of abstraction, a price tag, a supply chain, a work contract.
You buy a product on your phone, and the destruction happens invisibly, thousands of miles away.
It's like we are all trapped inside a giant casino.
Oh, I like this analogy.
The architecture of the casino is explicitly designed to keep you at the tables. There are no clocks on the walls, the drinks are free, The carpets are specifically patterned to keep you awake.
And if you suddenly realize you are losing your life savings and decide you want to stop playing and leave, the system makes it incredibly psychologically and financially painful to walk out the door.
You are locked in.
So what keeps this casino running? Like, what are the engines driving this constant expansion?
The author breaks them down meticulously into three distinct engines operating at different levels of society. The first engine is businesses, and their driving force is productivism.
Okay, productivism, meaning they always have to produce more.
Right. In a capitalist market, a business must constantly seek to increase efficiency, lower costs, and expand its market share.
Because if a company decides it is happy with its current size and stops trying to grow,
It will eventually be outcompeted, undercut, and destroyed by a rival that is still expanding. Growth is a literal matter of survival for the firm.
so the business is trapped by competition. What is the second engine?
The second engine is households. That's us. And our driving force is consumerism.
And a lot of that is manufactured by the advertising industry, right?
Yeah.
Which spends billions of dollars to convince us that our fundamental needs for identity or affection can be satisfied by purchasing a new car or a specific brand of clothing.
It is manufactured, but it is also systemic. We are forced into consumerism because non-market alternatives have been intentionally dismantled.
Right. Like, if a city defunds its public transportation system and builds sprawling suburbs without sidewalks, I am forced to buy a car, buy insurance, and buy gasoline just to satisfy my basic need for subsistence by getting to work.
My consumerism is mandated by the physical design of the environment.
Exactly.
And what's the third engine?
The third engine is the state. The government's driving force is economism.
So why are governments so addicted to GDP growth?
Several reasons. They need growth to maintain employment levels. They need the tax revenue generated by a growing economy to fund public services, and crucially, to pay the interest on national debts.
Oh, right, because the debt is always growing with interest. Yes, and on a global stage, GDP is the ultimate measure of geopolitical power and military capability.
So you have businesses, households, and the state, all mutually reinforcing this frantic push for expansion.
And the mechanism they use to measure that expansion is the percentage rate. This brings us to the terrifying math of the exponential function.
Well, let's talk about that math, because it's so deceptive. When a politician stands at a podium and promises a 2% annual growth rate, it sounds so modest.
It sounds like a gentle, reasonable trajectory, just 2% more than last year.
But that is the optical illusion of exponential compounding, isn't it?
It is. Because the baseline grows every year, a consistent 2% growth rate means the total size of the economy doubles roughly every 35 years.
Wait, let's really visualize the physical implications of that. If the global economy, which is already drastically overshooting the planet's ecological limits, doubles in the next 35 years.
That means we will need to extract, produce, and consume as much material in the next 3.5 decades as we have in all of human history combined.
That is horrifying. We will need double the energy, double the land for agriculture, double the copper for wiring.
And then 35 years after that, it doubles again. It is a geometric progression running headfirst into the rigid physical limits of a spherical planet.
This is why Parrique insists that greening this exponential curve is a mathematical impossibility.
Yes, and to demonstrate how this plays out in the real world, the book provides some vital thought experiments that distinguish between what economists call technical progress and what Parrique calls anthropological progress.
Okay, let's look at the first example from the book, the shared drill, because this really exposes the friction between efficiency and actual human need.
Okay, so imagine an engineer invents a brilliant new manufacturing process for a power drill. They figure out how to produce the drill using half the raw materials, half the electricity, and half the labor it previously required.
By every traditional metric, that is a massive victory. That is green efficiency right there.
In isolation, yes. But we don't live in isolation. We live in a growth-driven economy.
Right, the casino.
Because the drill is now cheaper to make, the company's productivism engine kicks in. They want to maximize profit, so they produce twice as many drills.
They aggressively market them, and now every single household on the street buys their own drill.
Exactly. The total volume of materials used remains the same, or even increases. And what is the actual usage of that product? The average power drill is used for a total of maybe 12 to 15 minutes over its entire lifespan.
12 minutes. It spends 99.9% of its existence sitting in a garage gathering dust.
But total production doubled and GDP went up. Economists celebrate this as technical progress, the system optimized for exchange value.
Okay, let's contrast that with scenario B. What does anthropological progress look like?
Imagine that instead of a new manufacturing process, the people on that street decide to create a localized sharing network, a tool library.
Okay, so instead of 50 houses buying 50 individual drills, the neighborhood collectively purchases 2 high-quality, durable drills.
Right, and anyone who needs to put a hole in a wall can check one out.
The fundamental human need, the need to make a hole in a wall to hang a picture, is perfectly satisfied.
In fact, it might be satisfied better because the act of sharing builds community trust. It touches on Max Neef's need for participation.
But what happens to the macroeconomic dashboard?
Because 48 fewer drills were manufactured, shipped, marketed, and sold, the GDP of that community shrinks.
So from the perspective of the state and the business engines, the tool library is a disaster. It is destroying economic value.
That is a total inversion of reality. The sharing network is clearly a superior, more rational use of Earth's resources.
The practical teaching here is profound for your listening. If we want to genuinely improve society and achieve ecological sanity, we will often have to intentionally shrink the GDP.
We have to actively seek out non-market solutions that fulfill needs without moving money.
This leads to an even darker example that Parrique uses to highlight the moral bankruptcy of GDP accounting: the forest fire.
This one is staggering. If you actually read the United Nations National Accounting Handbook, which is the rule book for how GDP is calculated globally, you will find a shocking omission.
Was it?
The baseline existence of nature has zero monetary value.
Meaning a virgin, ancient forest is worth $0 on the national balance sheet, as long as it just stands there doing nothing.
Correct. Now imagine a massive wildfire sweeps through and burns that ancient forest to the ground.
In terms of real wealth, it is a catastrophic loss. The carbon sink is gone, the biodiversity is incinerated, the local water filtration is ruined, the bathtub of real stock has been drained.
But what does the GDP dashboard record?
It only records the frantic market transactions that the disaster triggers, the millions of dollars paid in wages to the emergency firefighters, the massive amounts of jet fuel and gasoline sold to power the helicopters and fire trucks,
The chemical retardants purchased from chemical companies, the subsequent contracts to rebuild the destroyed homes.
Because the disaster forced a massive amount of money to change hands, the forest fire actually causes the GDP to go up.
The nation looks richer on paper precisely because it suffered a devastating ecological loss.
That is so deeply broken.
Yeah.
And Parrique takes this logic to its absolute chilling extreme with the example of an endangered species.
Right. If a rare species of fish is swimming in the ocean, reproducing and maintaining the marine ecosystem, it contributes zero to the GDP.
But if a commercial fishing fleet hunts down and exterminates the very last members of that species, hauls them to port, and sells them at a premium price to luxury restaurants,
The GDP increases.
we literally generate economic growth by causing a permanent extinction.
Yes.
If GDP is celebrating forest fires and extinctions, we have to ask how we ever allowed this specific thermometer to become the ultimate arbiter of human success. Who designed this?
This requires looking at the historical process. GDP is not a natural law. It is a very recent invention.
Okay, where did it come from?
It was primarily developed in the 1930s by an economist named Simon Kuznets, and the context is crucial here.
Like the 1930s, the Great Depression.
Exactly. The U.S. government commissioned Kuznets to create a metric to help them understand the depths of the Great Depression. They needed to know if their recovery policies were working.
And then a few years later, the metric was adapted to calculate industrial production capacity for World War II.
Yes, they needed to know how many tanks and planes the economy could physically output.
So it was invented as a highly specific tool for highly specific emergencies, recovering from a historic depression and fighting a global industrialized war.
Yes, and Kuznets himself explicitly warned the U.S. Congress that this tool should never be used as a measure of national welfare.
He knew it was flawed.
He knew it was a blunt instrument that ignored the distribution of wealth and the value of non-market labor, like, raising children.
But after the war, during the rebuilding of Europe and the onset of the Cold War, that warning was just ignored.
The exact error in the historical process was that the indicator became the objective.
We forgot what we were measuring for and just started worshiping the measurement itself.
It became production for the sake of production. Parrique compares this to a human being.
Oh, the teenager analogy.
Yeah. When a child is young, physical growth getting taller, gaining weight, is a healthy, necessary indicator of development.
Right.
But imagine a young adult who finishes their growth spurt but becomes utterly obsessed with getting taller. They keep eating thousands of calories, demanding to grow.
Past a certain stage of maturity, growth isn't measured in inches or pounds anymore. It is measured in intellectual development, emotional maturity, and the quality of relationships.
Exactly. A mature adult trying to grow physically larger just results in obesity and structural damage to the body.
We have mature industrialized economies acting like teenagers demanding to grow another foot taller.
It's absurd.
So what are the actionable steps for you listening? How do we apply this method of deconstruction when we hear politicians demanding more growth?
The primary actionable step is to denaturalize economic growth. We have to stop treating the economy like it is the weather, something that just happens to us.
Growth is a specific socio-historical anomaly. It is a choice.
So when a politician pounds the podium and promises growth, you must apply a critical filter. You must ask three specific questions. Growth of what, for whom, and at what cost?
Let's test that filter. If someone says, we need growth in the energy sector, we ask, growth of what?
Are we talking about the growth of decentralized solar panels or the growth of deep water oil drilling?
For whom? Is the financial benefit going to local communities or to the shareholders of a multinational monopoly?
At what cost? Is the cost a temporary disruption or the permanent poisoning of an aquifer?
Exactly. You break the spell of the word itself.
The second actionable step is shifting our vocabulary regarding the solution. When people hear the word degrowth, they often panic, imagining a sudden crash, a recession, or a return to the Stone Age.
Right, because we associate a shrinking GDP with suffering.
But Parrique uses the analogy of a diet or a soft landing. If you are speeding toward a cliff, you don't yank the steering wheel and flip the car. You intentionally, thoughtfully apply the brakes.
If you go to a doctor and they tell you that your cholesterol is sky high, and you are on the verge of a massive heart attack, you don't start crying and say, oh no, a recession of my body.
No, you say, okay, I need to intentionally stop eating highly processed junk food so my body can return to a healthy metabolic state.
Degrowth is putting the macroeconomic superorganism on a necessary, life-saving diet.
We are scaling down the destructive, unnecessary parts of the economy like fast fashion, planned obsolescence, and private jets so we can thrive within our ecological limits.
Which brings us perfectly to the core principles, the ideas worth remembering. If you take away nothing else from this deep dive, these are the concepts that should permanently alter your perspective. The first idea is planetary apartheid.
That is an incredibly heavy term.
It is, but it's warranted because we have to shatter the myth of shared responsibility. You must remember the disparity. The richest 1% of people on Earth have captured 38% of all new wealth generated since 1995.
And the poorest half of the global population received only 2%.
This immense concentration of wealth directly correlates to ecological destruction. Parrique describes climate change as a form of slow violence.
Yes, it is a violence perpetrated by the lifestyle of the global rich. But the consequences, the droughts, the rising sea levels, the collapsed fisheries, they primarily devastate impoverished populations in the global south, who contributed almost nothing to the problem.
The crisis is not a human crisis. It is an inequality crisis.
The second idea to remember builds on the human biology analogy. More is not always better. For rich, developed nations, places like France, the US, the UK continuing to pursue raw GDP growth does not translate to better lives.
Empirical data shows that past a certain threshold, which these countries passed decades ago, adding more GDP does not increase life expectancy, happiness, or social cohesion.
It simply increases ecological overshoot and accelerates the metabolic drain on the planet. We do not have a production problem anymore, we have a distribution problem.
And the third idea is perhaps the most difficult for mainstream environmentalists to accept. Green growth is a myth.
This challenges the dominant narrative that we can just invent our way out of this with solar panels and electric cars. We hear constantly about circular growth or blue growth.
Parrique argues this is just a rebranding of the exact same destructive matrix.
It is an illusion for several key reasons, but the most important is the rebound effect, historically known as Jevons paradox.
Okay, explain Jevons paradox for us.
William Stanley Jevons was a 19th century economist who noticed that when steam engines became more efficient at burning coal consumption didn't go down, it went up.
Wait, really? Because it was more efficient, they used more?
Yes, because energy was cheaper, people found hundreds of new ways to use steam engines.
We see this today with LED lights. We invented highly energy-efficient lighting, but instead of using less electricity, we just made our screens brighter, illuminated buildings all night long, and put giant digital billboards everywhere.
The efficiency didn't save energy, it just expanded consumption.
This is why absolute decoupling, the idea that GDP can rise infinitely while environmental impact drops to zero, is empirically failing.
The math of exponential growth eventually swallows any technological efficiency gains. You cannot have 50 shades of growth. The only physical solution is to step off the exponential treadmill entirely.
To navigate all of this, Parrique provides an incredibly practical heuristic, a mental rule of thumb that you can apply to any economic choice, policy, or purchase. You must rigorously separate use value from exchange value.
Let me define those. Use value is the actual tangible way a good or service satisfies a fundamental human need.
Okay, so a heavy winter jacket has a use value.
Right.
It protects you from the freezing cold. A tomato has a use value. It provides calories and vitamins.
Exactly. Exchange value is simply the price tag. It is how much money the item can be traded for in the market.
So a luxury designer jacket with a famous logo might have an exchange value of $3,000, while a generic jacket from a thrift store has an exchange value of $20.
But their use value, keeping your body temperature stable, is exactly the same.
So the heuristic is this. Whenever you hear a new economic proposal, ask yourself if it is increasing use value, making human lives genuinely better, or if it is merely maximizing exchange value, moving more money around for the sake of GDP.
Right. A community garden creates immense use value with almost zero exchange value.
While a billionaire purchasing a superyacht creates massive exchange value with actively negative use value for society due to the pollution and resource hoarding.
We are optimizing the entire globe for price tags instead of usefulness.
Now, as much as this framework makes logical sense, I want to introduce some serious friction here. We have to be intellectually honest and look at the critiques and limitations of this theory.
Sure, let's do it.
I am struggling with the practical reality of this diet. Our entire society is built on wage labor. If we intentionally shrink the economy, if businesses produce less and consumers buy less, aren't we just triggering mass unemployment?
It's the most common fear.
How does Parrique reconcile a macroeconomic diet with a single mother needing to pay her rent next month?
That is the most potent friction against degrowth, and Parrique addresses it directly. He argues that the rigid link between GDP and employment is a political choice, not a natural law.
Okay, but how?
If an economy requires us to produce mountains of useless plastic garbage just to keep people employed so they don't starve, the system is irrational. The degrowth solution involves redefining work.
Meaning what, exactly?
If we need to produce less overall to save the planet, we must reduce the working week. We implement widespread job sharing.
So instead of one person working 60 hours a week producing fast fashion and another person being unemployed, two people work 30 hours a week.
Yes, and we actively shift labor away from high-resource, ecologically destructive sectors like fossil fuel extraction or the massive advertising industry, and move that labor into low-resource, high-care sectors.
Like education, healthcare, elder care, and ecological restoration.
Exactly. These are sectors that produce immense use value, but traditionally a very low exchange value.
But wait, doesn't that imply a complete collapse of innovation? If we remove the profit motive of exponential growth, don't we lose the drive to invent the very technologies like advanced medical treatments or clean energy grids that we desperately need?
The counter-argument Parrique makes is that growth-driven capitalism is actually a terrible engine for the innovation we truly need.
How so?
It doesn't prioritize solving human problems. It prioritizes whatever makes the most money. Under the current system, billions of dollars and our best engineering minds are dedicated to creating an app that delivers a hamburger 4 minutes faster.
Or an algorithm that keeps teenagers addicted to a screen.
Right. Meanwhile, a researcher studying regenerative soil techniques struggles for basic grant funding. A post-growth economy would still innovate fiercely, but it would direct human ingenuity toward solving socio-environmental challenges rather than manufacturing new consumer desires.
Let me see if I can map that out. It's a difference between innovating a new way to share cars effectively across a city versus innovating a new psychological trick to make everyone want to buy a second car.
That's a great way to put it.
But even if the logic holds, the systemic lock-in seems insurmountable. You mentioned earlier that we are hostages. If I decide to individually embrace degrowth today, if I quit my corporate job, stop buying things, and try to live on a community farm, I don't transform the economy.
No, you don't.
I just lose my health care, default on my mortgage, and go bankrupt.
And that is the ultimate limitation Parrique acknowledges. The friction isn't that degrowth is theoretically impossible. The friction is that it requires dismantling massive, deeply ingrained institutional structures.
Like prices, work contracts, 30-year mortgages, national pension funds.
Every single one of these was calculated on the assumption of endless future growth. Slowing down individually is terrifying because the casino is designed to punish anyone who stops playing.
There's a profound psychological barrier at play here, too. Our collective imagination has been totally hijacked by the dashboard.
Totally hijacked.
It is somehow easier for the average person to imagine an apocalyptic, dystopian future cities drowned by oceans, societies collapsing into ash, than it is to simply imagine an economy where we produce less stuff, work fewer hours, and share resources.
That is the highest hurdle. Degrowth requires an unprecedented shift in human consciousness. It requires us to collectively realize that the rules of the economy are not the laws of physics.
We invented them, and therefore we can rewrite them.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the final synthesis of this deep dive. How does this specific chapter fundamentally alter how we see the world?
I think the biggest shift is that you can never look at a rising GDP the same way again.
No, you really can't.
When you see a news ticker announcing a 3% growth in the economy, you won't feel a vague sense of relief. You will see a metabolic organism that is dangerously overeating, consuming its host, and drowning in its own waste.
You also shift the burden of blame. You stop blaming humanity as an abstract, inherently flawed species. You recognize the capital O scene.
The demand for infinite profit and exponential material expansion is a specific operating system. We are not inherently a plague upon the earth. We are just running highly destructive software.
We invented the dashboard, which means we have the power to unscrew it from the console and build a new one. So we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over on your own. It builds on everything we've unpacked today, but asks you to take the next step in your own imagination.
It's the most important question.
Think back to that car dashboard we started with. If GDP is just a rudimentary 1930s thermometer that only measures how hot the engine is running, and right now, that engine is visibly catching fire, what would your ideal dashboard for human progress actually look like?
Yeah.
If you were the lead engineer of a new society, what specific metrics, what new dials would you put in front of the steering wheel to prove that you, your community, and the planet are truly thriving?
It is arguably the most important design question of the 21st century.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. As a reminder, this is just part one of an ongoing series exploring the profound ideas in this book. Please check the description for the link to the original text, read it for yourself, and join us next time as we continue to unpack the economics of slowing down.